Welcome back to the podcast. Today's episode is a special treat. We have Mr. River Karaba, and River is he's a social media genius, a marketing guru. He's all the above. An amazing guy, and I really enjoyed the conversation we had, kind of discussing the idea of planting the seed in somebody's head to influence them to do something, and kind of the positive side of that, but also the slightly scary side of that. And River definitely was able to speak to all of that as an expert in that field. And I expect and I hope that we'll have River on many more times in the future, covering a wide variety of topics. He was just a pleasure to talk to. He's an intelligent fella, and I can't say enough good things about him. So without further ado, Mr. River Karaba. All right, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. River Karaba. What's up, buddy? How you doing?
Great, man. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. You're one of the first people I thought of when I thought of doing this podcast.
Really? That's awesome. Thanks.
And we'll get into why here a little bit later, but there is, I feel like you have some understanding of the world today that most people don't. So again, we'll get into that here in a little bit, but we're gonna start this off like I do with everybody, the icebreaker questions. Okay.
Ooh, okay.
Just real simple stuff, just to figure out who you are and what you're all about. So, favorite place that you've ever been?
Ooh, man. I think like you, having gone to Thailand is like a complete culture shock as a Westerner, right? That was a super awesome trip. But if I'm being totally honest, about a couple of years ago, my dad and all my brothers, it was the first trip we've ever all gone on together. And we just like went fishing in northern Canada, and it was just spectacular, the views and obviously the camaraderie and things like that. So that probably has to take it for me just from the experience alone.
You guys did a video on your YouTube about that, right?
Yeah, I did like 3 or 4 videos on it. It was a place called Quagama Lake in Ontario, not necessarily northern Ontario, but it was beautiful.
Dude, I was wildly envious. I was like, look at all the beards and all the flannel and all the coffee.
No electricity, no plumbing. It was brilliant.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Like that sounds like completely and totally my trip. But unfortunately, my wife doesn't like anything, colder than 70 degrees. So when I'm like, hey, let's take a vacation to Vancouver, BC, or let's go up north and go to the mountains or something like that, she's just super not interested. But one of these years I'm gonna do a man trip and do something similar.
Brilliant. Yeah, Lacey and Allison can go do their on the beach, and we can go do man shit in the cold.
Sign me up. When do we go? Okay. Right. So the next question is, do aliens exist?
Definitely. I think the fact that we exist, it's totally probable that something else does as well.
Okay. How now? I mean, now we could probably just do a whole separate podcast on this, but like what is it? Like, what within reach do you think is the reality there? Like, is that something that like we will ever truly know about? Do you think that we already know about it, but there's secrets being hidden? Do you think that, I don't know, expand on it a little bit.
Yeah. I'm a spiritual person, I think, that, I definitely believe in the divine and whatnot, but I do also believe that, that's kind of like the next level, right? The vastness of our universe, and just even like close to us, like the things that we're finding and discovering just within like our own solar system, I mean, it is insane, and I feel like you could get lost, and people have gotten lost even in their own heads of thinking of the vastness. So to me, it's just statistics, right? The probability, right? And based on the vastness, like there just it has to be a statistical chance that that is possible, right? To me, it's just more basic than that. It's not conspiracy or anything. I can understand if there was ever any like cover ups or things like that that people would want to mitigate for people panicking, but it's I think it's totally probable.
Yeah, it's refreshing to hear somebody else say that, because I bring this up all the time, and I wish I could talk to my wife about this, but every time she's like, every single time she's like, "Oh my gosh, we're not going to have to watch Interstellar again, are we?" Because I saw that movie, and that movie blew my mind. And then even like when tying it back to movies, like the end of the first Men in Black movie, when it like it zooms out of the planet and it just keeps going and going and going and going. I remember thinking, that's
Whoa.
a really, whoa. Like, I think I was like 9 or 10 years old. I don't even remember. I remember being really young and just going, wow, yeah,
right. Oh no.
we are wildly small in the grand scheme of things. So, okay, cool. Moving on. Like I said, I could talk about that one all day long. Celebrity.
You'll have me back and we'll do that.
Oh, perfect. Absolutely. We'll do like a sub series for repeated guests. Celebrity that is living or dead, you choose, I don't care. That you most want to hang out with, and why?
I think, even though it's like semi-fictional, based on popular media, have you ever seen the movie Jeremiah Johnson, Robert Redford?
I have not.
Oh, so you should definitely check it out. It's about a guy who like served in the Civil War and then was just kind of sick of everything and everything that was, and the emphasis on money and stuff. And he just took off for the Western frontier and just became a mountain man, like just lived off the land and stuff like that. And, I can definitely empathize with that at times, right? The desire.
I think I've seen some sort of meme. Isn't there some sort of meme out there with him like turning his head? Or it was in the movie?
That's
okay.
That's exactly him. Yeah.
That's the movie? Okay.
Yeah, that's the movie. And it would just be so interesting to like pick that real person's brain as to why, because I think there would be some pretty interesting parallels that are applied still today. So I don't know, of all the people I think in the world that you could interview, I think there's some more obvious choices. Like somebody would be like, oh, the founding fathers of the United States or something like that. But to me, it's just more basic. I don't want to get wrapped up in anything political. It's like, man, why did you do what you did, and how in the heck did you have the balls to do it? You know what I mean? Right.
And you're also tying back in beards and flannel, which is, I think we're finding a pattern here.
You gotta find your people, and you gotta stick together. If like undoubtedly.
Absolutely. Okay, so the last icebreaker question is the best binge watch of your entire life.
Oh man, I think that undoubtedly has to be just this past like holiday season. Allison and I did our like Christmas celebration and things like this. And we didn't feature this on the vlog, so this is some bonus nuggets of our level of degenerate behavior. But we got through the holiday, and it was one of the first holidays we did not have to travel anywhere for. And we're like, oh my gosh, this is a cool opportunity. And we thought we had all these grandiose plans. Like, we're going to go see this, we're going to go do that. But then the weather kind of turned on us. So we're like, man, what do we do? So starting the evening of Christmas Day, we were going to go like to a movie theater or whatever, but the weather turned right. So we started and had the idea to start over Game of Thrones. And so we started to watch episode 1, season 1. And it was probably like January 2nd or 3rd when we wrapped up the final episode of the up-to-date season nonstop. Well,
so you guys made like you took full advantage of that whole season. Like that's a tall order. Like how many hours is that?
Dude, in like 6 days we plowed through, what is that? Like almost like 50 episodes of like an hour each or something.
Man.
We just trucked it. Like it was of epic proportion. I don't think we left the house but like twice. And it was we had to like remind ourselves to bathe and things like that. It was just crazy. It was disgusting. Like, like what is life right now? Like what a privileged thing to do, but like, oh my God.
That is amazing. That is amazing. So, okay, we'll move on. So, I'll go ahead and I'll tell the story about how I know you. I met River through my friend Kyle, who is he's got a YouTube channel, and he used to be in the Air Force, and we were stationed in Japan at Kadena together. And he told me about his buddy River, and then I saw your guys' YouTube channel, and then I talked to you a couple times over the phone about like YouTube business and understanding all that kind of stuff. And it's weird, that whole community of YouTube. You feel like you know somebody just by watching their life, and I think in a lot of ways that's very true. I don't know like your favorite food or your favorite beverage or anything like that, or what makes you cry or what makes you smile, but I definitely have watched you and Allison and you guys transition in your lives, going from Chicago to Oregon to now Michigan, and you've been able to see like what we were doing, and so that whole side of things, that's baseline. That's how we know each other. So we'll leave it at that for right now. So give me your life story in 3 minutes.
3 minutes, dang. Okay. Yeah, I was born and raised in Michigan, in mid-Michigan. Was super active in sports and things like that. Went to school at Western Michigan University, go Broncos. And there I kind of decided that, hey, I wanted to get into business. And, I didn't even know what that meant. And kind of by a whim chose advertising. I went to like a student like career fair thing, and I was like, advertising sounds good. I always wondered about commercials and stuff like that. Like, why am I seeing it? So I went to school for that. I graduated right in the recession, and it was tough to get jobs. I really wanted to stay in Michigan, like the Detroit area, but that Detroit's like a whole nother podcast. But
absolutely.
I ended up moving to Chicago after working construction for a number of years with my family's businesses, and so I've come up in that this hard work, pay for it yourself. I worked like 40 hours a week on top of being involved in school, on top of doing 15 credit hours. Really carve your own path, and made my way to Chicago, work in advertising. And, I think as it relates to my passions and things, I was an analyst, basically a media analyst. So understanding the effectiveness of advertising and on people and things like that. And, it just kind of evolved into these passion points and YouTube and all of these things that I would administer for brands, like some of the biggest in the world. And but also I just started posting like random videos just to get more data. Like that's how nerdy it is, like I wanted to see the view counts and then all of the extra like layers of data you could peel back from that. And my own YouTube channel, like I started probably like 4 years ago or so. I just started posting, like I said, random videos. And even to this day, I know exactly what I would need to do to make it tick and make it, blow up and things like that. But that might not be consistent with what I want to post on YouTube. Right. And, I would say that our channel hasn't grown as much as it could have because of that. But what I also started to do about that same time is, I truly believe in what you could sum up my whole life and what I hope to, have my family and my kids be is, if you have a skill or if you have knowledge or something like that, and you see someone who could benefit from that, or if they ask you, I am personally obligated to help that person for no other reason than just because you can. I've had people be like, well, that's not really smart of you from a business sense. And I said, no, maybe not, but I'm a firm believer that, people need to start helping more people with zero benefit and zero skin in the game just because it's the right thing to do, not because you can have any gain from it. So, I think I've kind of tried my best I can to live my life and in that way. And, Ellison and I and our family will live that way as well. But, that's how I got involved with Kyle, who then introduced me to you. And like you said, yeah, we had a call to talk about some stuff. And, I just have deep knowledge of kind of the back end of YouTube and things like that, if anybody can benefit from that, and I'm not saying I'm the best, most accurate guy in the world, but if someone can do that, we benefit from it. Great.
Dude, so it turns out that you're not going to be on the podcast one more time. You're going to be on the podcast a dozen more times. That like, I am like severely like, I feel like I identify with you 100 times more because I'm the same way. I'm not an expert at everything by any means. I don't even try to pretend to be. But if I'm passionate about something, I'm going to learn it as best as I possibly can.
Yeah. Why not? Yeah.
And then therefore I'm probably going to become an expert at it, and I want to share. Like it's so cheesy. You hear people say, "Oh, I want to help people." And I can't say that about everything. I don't want to help somebody cross the street. I don't want to help somebody move. God, no, please don't call me and ask me to help you move. I don't want to
expert though.
Right. I don't want to move couches and mattresses. That's not my idea of like helping people. I want to help. I want to share what I know with people so they can become smarter and better. So yeah, we'll probably, River is going to be a reoccurring guest on the ... podcast. So,
Perfect.
So anyway, so that's awesome. Like you definitely, you have an understanding of what's going on the interwebs and what's going on in the minds of people. And I got to thinking about that, and I was like, I know you went, obviously you went to college, and that's great, but like, what did you major in? Like, actually, just answer that question. What is your technical major that's printed on your degree?
Yeah, in my undergrad from Western Michigan, I majored in advertising and promotions with a minor in general business, which advertising at Western Michigan is in our B school, in the College of Business, which is actually not normal. Normally, advertising is in a communication school. So yeah, I've got a BBA from Western Michigan.
Okay. Do you have a grad degree or anything yet?
Nope. Maybe now I'm in the backyard of the University of Michigan. Now I'm based in Ann Arbor. So yeah, maybe one day. I'm a firm believer in it is completely possible that you can just be an educated idiot, right? Like,
Exactly.
it's I was talking to my nephew a few years back who felt very pressured to go to college, and it's just not something that he was really passionate about. And my whole family is I would say 90% blue collar. And so I think that not only do I identify with that and sometimes feel a bit of imposter syndrome, working at some of the places that I've been privileged to work, but there is absolutely nothing wrong with any type of job that you choose to pursue. He ended up choosing a trade, being an electrician, and holy shit, the world cannot exist without electricians and plumbers and you name it. I mean, we're not going to continue to just stop building or doing things like that. We rely on these people, and they're severely understaffed in the US right now. And we can talk about wage gaps or politics, whatever you want to get after, but I identify as well. Like, I really want to do things with my hands and things like that. And, whether it's this podcast or another, you may or may not know that I pursued the military very hard. I talk about it in a couple of videos on our YouTube channel, all the way up to, I was getting orders to go to OCC for the Marine Corps.
No kidding.
So,
I didn't know that. That's amazing.
Yeah. So, and some things happened, like, kind of very weirdly in my world, that ended up pointing me in the direction, after 2.5 years of training and getting in arguably the best shape of my whole life, to be selected by my OSO to be put up. And then the 10,000 foot story is the Obama administration at the time downscaled the military.
Yeah.
And so basically my OSO had to call me back and say, listen, the next class just got downgraded from like 189 to 157, and you're in that bubble.
Wow.
So I was getting ready to leave my job, the whole thing, like, to go. And then basically that was about the time that I met my now wife, and she wasn't exactly thrilled at the idea and all of these things. And for 2.5 years before that, I kept trying to be qualified, and it kept getting like shot down, shot down, shot down. And like I said, I definitely believe in a divine influence and things like that. And then at this point, it kind of just struck me of like, maybe this is not what I'm supposed to do, because after all these things and barriers that keep getting thrown ahead of me, I like I said, I don't want to get too far into spirituality, but like at some point, you know, they're just gonna it's just gonna let it happen, and then what happens to you, right? Like, how when are you not gonna interpret a sign as, this isn't what I'm supposed to do? So after all that, I walked away from it, and that was a tough choice. I always had a call to serve, and I try to never forget the sacrifices and appreciate, you, and you're if you, I guarantee, if you had the preference to be with your wife and kids, right at this moment, like without hesitation, you would be there. But
Without hesitation, yeah.
the sacrifices that you make, I really appreciate, and I don't. I strive to never forget the sacrifices. I understand, and some people and a lot of my family serves in the military, and everyone's like, hey, thank you for your service. I try to articulate that is I'll try to never forget your sacrifice, right? So yes, of course, thank you for your service, but I feel like, you know forgetting your sacrifice, I think, is the most egregious thing that a citizen in the United States could do for a member of the military.
That's awesome. I mean, I feel the same way. You know, I often find myself thanking people for their service. I probably once a month, it almost seems that, I go to some sort of retirement ceremony because, I'm surrounded by military members, and every once in a while, everybody hits their retirement eligibility. And, I felt like cheesy saying that the first couple times, but I really truly mean it. Like, I'm not just the guy that wears a uniform. I'm also the guy that, pays my taxes. And, I have a vested interest, when I'm 60, 70 years old, because I do what I do, I know that I can sleep safe because of what's going on, in places that I don't know about. So, I often find myself thanking people, hey, thanks so much for your service. Thanks for what, or even like as a going away, somebody's moving from one base to the next. It's like, hey, thanks for everything you did here.
Absolutely.
You definitely left your stamp, and thank you for that. So, I like, in a cheesy, corny way, I want to thank you just for even, raising your hand, but not being able to get in on a, it's a bureaucracy and it's a technicality at the time. So the fact that you were even open-minded to it is crazy. I remember when I was 18 or 19, I think I was 19 when 9/11 happened. And, I was a very different person at that point in time in my life. And I remember watching all this stuff happen, and my buddy was like, dude, we're both going to get drafted and we're going to go to war. Like, this is about to happen. Like, this is the most significant,
Right.
This is the most significant thing to happen for us. I'm
It
37.
defined our generation.
Right. How old are you?
I'm 30.
Okay. I'm 37.
So I'm a bit younger
Or
than you.
I'm almost 37. I'll be 37 in a couple weeks. But I remember watching it happen, and I remember thinking like, wow, that's real. And it just didn't align with what my goals and my agenda was at the time. And I remember being out at lunch with a very good friend of mine, and I was like, and he said that, he's like, we're going to get drafted, man. We're going to go to war. And I was like, I'm going to Canada is what's going to happen, like, no way, no how. And, fast forward a few years, and I joined, and like voluntarily, and my buddy didn't, bless his heart. He's a great dude. But the fact that he had that intestinal fortitude built up in him, that this is what we're going to do. This is what we have to do. Like, there's that pride that you see in, movies from World War II and stuff like that. So anyway, that's a whole other vlog too. So,
Right.
I really want to take a look at like what you do. So, I'll be honest, I stalked your LinkedIn. I checked it out.
Gotcha.
It's good stuff. That's a handsome picture you got on there. But one of the things that I started to notice is that your job title or your positions are often referred to as marketing science.
Yeah.
Can you expand on what the term marketing science is for the listening crowd? Because I have something else I looked up that we'll look at here in a second, but I want to hear it from you.
Sure. It's a really fancy sounding way to say analytics, and that's a really fancy way to say data, right? So, when I started my career, I was what was called as a media planner or a strategist, which basically, if you think about advertising, you see TV ads. That's the best way I can use this that everybody may understand. There are people that we refer to as creatives that physically shoot and build the thing that you see, right? There's account people that coordinate and project manage and do all the good stuff with communicating with a client and conveying their objectives. And then
Right.
there's media, which is what we refer to, which is like the strategy, which is who, what, when, where, why, right? So
Okay.
how do we get this message in front of the person who's it's intended to be shown to, and then how do we measure people's response or receptiveness or interpretation or things like that. So my job for the better part of my career has been to interpret the signals that are created by various forms of marketing and understand how it's being received, or is it shifting people's perception or building trust, or whatever the objectives are, right, through different forms of technology. So that has forced me to have very deep technical knowledge of things on the internet or out in the world than how we measure different forms of media. And it's vastly different depending from, billboards outside to television to, anything you see on YouTube or whatnot. But yeah, I mean, basically marketing science is a fancy way to say analytics. And, that also includes things like modeling behavior and things, but now we're getting a little deep. But yeah, basically math.
Right. So, the idea there being, you could go way deeper. In my job is the same thing. I can give you an elevator pitch as to what I do. But for me to go ahead and explain what somebody who's like a super expert in what we do, that's going to take some time. So
Totally.
what I found in just like a simple Google search of what marketing science is, I identified that it is aimed at understanding the customer's needs so as to better market products and services to them. Would you say that that's like kind of general scope, that that's correct?
I think that is definitely part of it, a big part of it for sure.
Okay. That being the case, so you've worked with, we're going to just go ahead and bleep out the names because we don't want to, tie you to any specific situations or anything like that. And I think you deserve that anonymity with what you do. But like you said, we're dealing with some of the biggest names in the industry, no questions asked, right?
I would agree with that. In the world of tech, probably you can think of some of the names that come to mind. I've had experience with them. Yep.
And I'll tell you that I know them. I'm not going to say them, but none of them there's not a one of them that I haven't heard of and or personally utilized. So you guys get the big picture. So explain to me like a typical marketing campaign, that you might get involved with as a project manager of that. What is something that you guys are doing? Like what's that look like from like cradle to grave, in like a simple kind of capacity?
Man, that's a really great question, and I feel like if I'm able to land this, I should get some sort of like honorary PhD or something because it's very complex.
I won't
But
give you
basic
a PhD, but I'll send you some Turkish candies or something like that. How's that sound?
Turkish delight, love
Right.
it, perfect.
Perfect.
Yeah, right. So basically, 10,000 foot view. You've got some hopefully smart and qualified people at a business, right? Of any size, obviously the bigger, theoretically, their investment could be larger. So let's just assume that it's a big business for explanation purposes. So you've got, a marketing team over there who says, based on their business needs, we want to, have a campaign, which is what they refer to it, out in the market that will accomplish X, right? So we want to make people aware that this new car model is coming out, or we want to better understand, from an equity standpoint, and what I mean by that is like how people think or feel about a brand. Would you choose this over that? Would you, which of these brands do you feel has, like meets your needs, stuff like that, right? So we set
So
that,
it's
and
safe.
as a mark,
So it's safe to.
go ahead.
Sorry. There's for those that are listening. There's a weird delay thing here that we almost have to like combat for mic time just a little bit. So I'm letting him get the story across, but I have to interject real quick on this one. So it's not just as simple as we're trying to sell this product that we think is amazing, but more so we need to get this product to the person that it is intended for, correct?
I would say that those who approach marketing in the manner in which you just said are thinking about it correctly. I would say very few products can you just kind of throw at the wall and expect it to stick, right? If you think about having a product, or if you think about having a service, right? You will have, I will say objectively, much more success if you can identify and what we call target those people who are either open to your message, or honestly could be enriched. That's like nirvana, right? It's like getting the most relevant message in front of somebody who won't see your message as invasive, but actually enriching, like, oh cool, I actually do need that, or I do need this or that. If your plumbing explodes from your pipes freezing or something, and you're like, oh shit, I don't even know who to call, but all of a sudden you see an ad on TV for a plumber, you're like, thank God for that. I'm going to call that guy because I don't even know who to ask, so that's enriching. That's what the goal is. But the only way you can do that is by understanding who is your target audience, right? And who should I be speaking to? In what ways are those people consuming media? And then that would help you determine. So back to kind of like planning a campaign, right? You have your objectives. Ideally, they're setting ahead of time. That's what the smart people do. And then who is the audience, and how do we best reach those people, right? I think you could agree that the way 75, 80-year-old man consumes media is probably not the exact same as a 10-year-old girl, right? So that was a bad example because we don't target children, right? That was a bad example. But okay, an 18-year-old woman as opposed to an 80-year-old man, you could see is different, right? So
That's
that's
actually
what
an
you
amazing example because I was just at home for the holidays with my grandfather, who is I think he's 87 or 88 years old, and my daughter, who is 8, and my niece, who is also 8, are sitting there trying to explain something to him, and it's just all flying over his head,
right.
like he can't even remotely think about dialing in. So if you were trying to sell them the same product that they both needed, I would imagine there's going to have to be a different approach. And I think a lot of people think, well, oh, he's old, so he needs paper in his hand. And he is old, but he definitely interacts in a digital world. So you have to find a way to find out where he's accessing his information, so you can coin to that, right?
Totally. Yeah. Obviously, the younger generations have grown up with all of this technology. They don't know the world without Wi-Fi, let alone internet and cell phones and things like that. Like people like you and I don't, our kids won't know ever the struggle of, that stretched out phone cord, right? From that used to sit in the kitchen or whatever,
Yeah, all
because you
tangled
try to
up.
walk across the house, like they look at that and they're like, what's that? Is that for the tying up the dog or something?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know, but yeah. So, I mean, there's just different ways that you have to advertise to people. And then kind of the last thing would be, doing the logistics to put the media in market, which is wildly vast and convoluted, but then deploying, again, if you're smart, technology or methods to understand the efficacy, how effective that media is at driving the ultimate objective. Just like anything, you need focus. Otherwise marketing can become this like game of whack-a-mole, right, of like what you're focusing on. And that's where my job helps them get set up in the beginning. And then there's generally other people who place the media, and then my job really picks up when understanding who saw it, how did they feel about it, what did they do, and then enabling those signals to then feed back into the beginning stages, for the next investment or the next iteration, things like that.
Wow. I mean, I think people know that there is a conscious effort being, focused on them so they can decide, I think people aren't stupid. Like the other day, Lacey called me and she was on the phone. She was like, "Hey, one thing that we kind of overthought when we moved is we sold off our patio furniture when we left Japan, and we don't have anything in the backyard now. Like we need to get something." And I was like, "Oh yeah, that's a good point." This was a phone call over FaceTime, and then literally the next time I opened my email, I had an email from Lowe's saying 20% off patio furniture. I was like, "What in the hell?" And I got on Facebook and it was like, "Do you need new patio furniture?" And I'm like, this almost feels invasive. Like who's listening? Is my house bugged? Like I don't feel safe, and I think of people like you. I mean, and not in a bad way. Obviously it's a noble profession. It's super interesting to tap into the psyche. You chop it up as, oh, well, it's analytics. It's just data. But that data collection has a purpose, right?
Yeah, and it's that your point that you made is super valid, and I feel like people see that every single day and raise an eyebrow and go, "Oh man," And I will start with, well, maybe the more negative, and not that there isn't bad actors out there, right? I think when you saw Mark Zuckerberg testify before Congress and explain these things, the only thing that rang so clear, especially for people our age and maybe a bit younger, was, holy shit, people definitely do not understand this industry, right? And the bad actors that are out there, I mean, I will tell you straight up, there is companies out there, and some of the bigger ones are actually doing things to protect and get ahead of litigation and before any regulation comes, because they know that may inhibit their business models and things like that. But there are actually systems in place to prevent people from getting a little too scary. In Europe last May, there was a thing that went into place called GDPR, which is protecting people's data privacy and hold companies legally responsibly, financially responsible for breaches in data and things like we've seen in the industry, which is, I think, is very positive, right? You definitely want to protect people's privacy. You definitely don't want to do that. But the reality is, the way that advertising could, not saying that it does, track and use data and things like that, is in a lot of cases a lot more sophisticated than what the NSA does, right? Because the thing at the NSA is there's people watching the watchers, right? Making sure that people aren't doing too much. Well, generally speaking, by my knowledge, there's not people internally at agencies making sure people don't go too far, right? And there's definitely things that happen, but I can assure you, through my exposure, a lot of times what's happening is marketers have models that, based on signals from the past, can very accurately predict what you are going to need or want, with things like your internet browsing history, stuff like that. You declared that you moved. All of these things puts you in a timeline of, this person is likely going to be in market for these things by this time. And so it's kind of the thing where all of a sudden you decide, like, man, I really like Jeeps. And then you go out for a drive and all of a sudden you see like 16 Jeeps. You're like, holy shit, everybody's got a Jeep,
Yeah,
right?
everybody
I
does.
forget the psychological name for that. But when you start to think about those things more prevalently, you actually begin to notice them more, right? So there's a couple factors at play. There's like the technology aspect of marketers and using signals to try to put something in front of you that's, again, relevant. But then also, there's like this recency effect of, oh man, we were just talking about that, and it just gets crazy, right? Because
and
that's
that
when,
and that piece is
yeah.
that piece is internal to you, right? That's not something like, that's organic to your brain. Like I think back to like whenever, so I'm currently a tech sergeant, and that's my rank. It's E6. And when I was a E5 and I was trying to get promoted to E6, I swear on everything that is holy and sacred. If I was walking into the grocery store or I was walking into work, I wouldn't walk past anything other than a tech sergeant, which is an E6. Like, I was like, oh my gosh, it's like the stars are aligning. They're telling me that it's going to happen and I'm going to get promoted. And oh my gosh, this is amazing. And
Right.
I was like, I could feel it. I remember going home telling my wife, I was like, they can tap into Google. I get that. But something bigger, something more powerful is telling me that I'm going to get this promotion. And she was just like rolling her eyes at me. She's like, you're ridiculous, And, but yeah, it's interesting to obviously know the other technical side of that there is somebody that is trying to make sure that you hear the information that is going to be relevant to you. And one of the things too is, I think, oh, I'm in marketing, I'm in advertising, and I think billboards, I think leaflets, I think stuff like that. But there is a psychological aspect to it as well. And I think the really interesting thing is that companies aren't necessarily putting all their stock so much in those big impact things anymore, because it's not so, those aren't so directed. You're not dealing with something that's going to maybe hit the target market by just putting up a billboard, because maybe you're trying to sell $1 million homes on the middle of a highway in the middle of some BFE state, where nobody that's driving through there that's reading those billboards has any intention of buying $1 million home. So the intent is to get it to more pointed places. So I think what I've noticed is that a lot of companies and organizations and stuff like that are using influencers to do so. What's your take on that? Like, you just take somebody that's willing to hold a camera in front of their face, like you or me, like with a channel, and they're like, well, we know, by the type of analytics that you give, we know that you are reaching this type of audience, and that type of audience is going to buy our product. So we want to hire you to kind of suggest that. That's crazy power. Somebody that's just willing to hold a camera all of a sudden becomes, has the ability to influence. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I won't pretend, and to your point on the billboard comment, that every marketer is sophisticated and does their research and, uh, puts effective marketing measures into market. People make silly decisions all the time, but, I think the most effective marketing plans, right, in my opinion, are using different pieces and components to deliver the same message, right? So, don't think it as one way. So if you see a video on YouTube that comes up ahead of your favorite whatever video, that could be a piece, right? And you want to maintain these different touch points to stay top of mind, right? So if you're watching a video and you see an ad for toothpaste, you're like, okay, whatever, and then you see that same ad or a different one like it for the same company on TV, and then you're driving on the way to the store and you see the billboard, and then all of a sudden you get to the grocery store and you're in the toothpaste aisle and you saw this new tartar control whatever whitening super duper stuff, and you're like, sometimes subconsciously when you get to the shelf you're like, oh yeah, I want to try that. And because they, like I said, the touch points, the way they interacted with you passively or more direct, is the goal, right? And to your point around influencers, right, the most effective means, in my opinion, for utilizing influencers is trust, right? You have these people who build relationships. I think you and I we're probably the last of people that disassociate, but even more so in our lives day to day, the internet world from reality. When we were younger, the internet was almost like your alter ego, right? Like,
Absolutely. Yeah.
this is like what I do online is a totally different life. But for especially younger people today, the internet is it's all one life.
It is
It's all,
real. It's
this
absolutely
is
real.
myself and how I communicate with different people, right? But then also it's the same in my reality. So you build these relationships, maybe just by watching over time. Like to your point when you said right in the beginning, like we know a ton about each other, definitely not everything, but just by consuming each other's content, right? And that's how we can maintain a relationship and then have a conversation like this, like we're just picking up. You know what I mean? And that's where influencers are super powerful because you have that trust built up. And I think an influencer, if they're smart, so if any creator is listening to this, you have an obligation to your audience to not violate that trust, right? Don't spam them with different products or merch or different things. I mean, granted, you have your own objectives that you're trying to accomplish, but if you very deliberately, again, back to, you see that plumber ad and it enriches your life, oh, that's something that I could actually use or need. If a creator is thinking about it that way and can, partner up with a brand whom, is trying to reach those types of people that is comprised in your audience, that is a match made in perfect advertising heaven, because you're going to be captive, you're going to tap into that trust, and that those types of products or services could be beneficial. I think the faster creators start thinking like these big tech companies, like the Googles and the Facebooks of the world, right? Like ultimately you can feel one way or another how you want about them, but truly at heart all they're trying to do is give you the most relevant ad, period. Because if you get a relevant ad, something that again is enriching to you, you will engage with it and potentially purchase, right? So if people aren't purchasing from those ads, those tech companies are not making money, because those advertisers will stop spending there if they're not working. So does that make sense? You know what I mean?
No, absolutely. So like the first, the word that comes to mind when I think of that is authenticity. If you are a person and your whole market is, I don't know, I'm thinking something simple, fitness, right? And then all of a sudden you're telling people, hey, you guys, I know my audience is fitness, but you really going to want to check out this motor oil company. Like,
Right.
Then it becomes obvious that you're being sold something.
Yep.
Whereas, I'm not even using this as a joke kind of like plug thing. It's not, what do they call it? Like a mid-roll insertion or something like that. I'm not, so when I started trying to do a podcast, I started looking for like, how do you do this? I was kind of surprised to find out that you don't actually just upload it directly to iTunes. You actually have to go through a host that or they host your podcast. They kind of store all the data and then they give it to that. So obviously, that sounds like an opportunity to make money. So there's 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or something like that companies out there. And the first one I went with, I was just like, I hate this. It feels like it was written on a DOS program, and it just didn't seem intuitive to being a user, especially with me, because I'm like a techie person. I like material things, but I don't understand, a lot of the tech side of things. So then all of a sudden I find this company called Anchor, and that's who I actually use. And they literally have like dumbed it down to make it super simple. Hey, you go record your stuff and then you upload it here. We'll do all the gonkulating and we'll fix it up so that it looks, bright and shiny when it gets up there. So, and one of the things that they do is they're like, oh, we're going to try to link you with different advertisers and stuff like that might want to try to push your stuff. And I was like, okay. And I had, like I was like, yeah, I totally I'll do the Anchor one. I'll go ahead and add that advertisement. Like, cause I believe in this product. I think it's great. I'm not going to BS anybody about that. And then like, I think the next one that came in was for like a tuxedo rental company. And I was like, yeah. I have a job, I have, I make a living. This is my hobby. I don't need to try to make money off of trying to sell people tuxedos. I've worn a tuxedo 2 days of my entire life. I didn't even wear a tux at my own wedding. So like, who the hell am I to say, oh, you guys need, if you're in the need for a tux, I found the company, and I don't know anything about them, So I think that side of it is kind of interesting, which, it kind of brings me to my next thing is like, is that sustainable? You think about like, what's that old saying? Like, you make a copy of a copy of a copy and it starts getting distorted, right?
Yeah.
So is that going to start happening with companies, giving their advertising dollars to, small creators and hoping that it's almost like telltale, like, oh, hey, my buddy Scott. Hey, Scott, like you only have, sorry, a better example would be like, maybe you have a small audience and,
Hmm.
and then you say, well, that guy has a small audience, but that's a very authentic audience.
Right.
They're completely loyal. So yeah, that's a great way to go. And they throw a couple bucks at it and they hope that sticks. I mean, at what point in time do they get worn out?
I mean, here's my thing, right? And I would implore anyone listening right now, whenever you approach a problem, potentially try to think about it from a different angle. Remove yourself from the immediate and think about, what are we ultimately trying to do here, right? And so for this matchmaking progress of, hey, I'm a creator, I'm trying to make money and sustain my creative prowess and abilities, with a brand who's trying to sell a product or create some awareness or whatever, the format becomes incredibly important, right? And I think that if you're a vlogger or something like that, weaving into your story relevant products that again relate to the story arc and provide value can be effective, right? In the form of like a podcast or I think like Phil DeFranco does it really well on YouTube of like, you are training your audience for advertisement insertion as a method that the audience comes to expect, that's helping you run your operation. When he did it so brilliantly, because early on he did it with his own merchandise, right, to train the behavior to then go to ads, like brands, and say, listen, where I just promoted my own t-shirt, that could be your ad spot, and I talk about whatever, right? I think people, I forget what the stat is, but you see hundreds of advertisements a day, whether you consciously know it or not. And you eventually become a little bit blasé to them. And that's where advertisers need to help break through the noise, right? But in this case, people are coming for your content. So you've trained them over time to be like, hey, and we're, gonna take a quick break and a message from, today's sponsor. I would say more and more people are sticking through. You'll always have people that take off because they're like, I don't want to sit through this ad.
Right.
But the more trust that you build, people will sit through it, especially if you're being brief, you're being providing value for that advertiser. But like I said, the format is so important. If all of a sudden in a vlog you cut away, I'm not saying this isn't effective, but I just, in my own opinion, something really abrupt and, like you said, totally irrelevant, people are going to be like, what the heck, like, did you sell out or something like that? So it's all a difference of making a good match with a good brand or a good service, and thinking about the format. So if you're trying to make money on YouTube or podcasts or any creative outlet, just think about it differently. How could you change your format then that might help you diversify income or come up with different ways of making money, that doesn't alienate your audience, but then provides value, right? So, that's where I would implore people to just think a little bit differently and don't put all your eggs in one basket. I think like creators on YouTube, particularly, really rely heavily on the ads platform, and YouTube has gone through their various forms of adpocalypse, as they call it, and things like that, they're just trying to get it right. And a lot of times, creators are getting what they view as dinged or suppressed, from these things. And my response to that is, don't put your eggs all in one basket. If YouTube decide to not sell ads on their platform tomorrow ever again, what in the heck would you do?
You'd be broke.
You know?
Yeah.
You're right. So, you got to think about that. Anything outside of your control, if you are selling products that are your own or services that are your own, right? Like, you're in control of that and you can go and market that in any way you want. But if you are just relying on some passive ad platform that pays you for existing, that's dangerous to rely on indefinitely.
Right. And I know me personally, we've had when we were living in Okinawa, we would have people, I remember joking around with Lacey being like, this is the weirdest thing ever. Like, how have we achieved some sort of celebrity status in a weird way? Like, we would walk into the BX and all of a sudden there would be like some lady sitting there, like with her jaw on the floor, waving her arms in the air, like trying to give us hugs. She's like, oh my God, it's you guys. And I'm like, wait, how do you?
It's super weird. We had a guy. Yeah, we had a guy one time. We were walking in Chicago, and apparently, it's kind of like a wake up moment too for you as a creator.
Right.
Apparently, on my walk to work, it was common for me to shoot the sites, and so people who are more local could know. Oh shit, that's the way that River walks to work.
Yeah,
Which
absolutely.
is then terrifying, because then one day we were coming back from like a grocery store or something like that, and all of a sudden this guy is like hooting and hollering on his bike and cuts across traffic to stop, and he's like, "You're Riven Al," and we're like, yeah, what's up, man?" And like at first it didn't register that, like, oh, this is from YouTube. Like I was racking my brain, like, how the hell do I know this guy? Like I have a pretty good like memory for faces, and I'm like, I don't remember ever meeting this guy. And he's like, oh yeah, I watch your YouTube channel. And I was like, oh, cool.
Awkward.
And
Yeah.
like we've had people send us messages like, hey, we're going to be in town, like, would you guys want to meet up? And it just kind of goes back to when we were kids. It's like your parents are like, don't talk to strangers on the internet and don't get in people's cars you don't know. And now that's like all you do with like Uber and the internet. And
Well, now all the strangers on the internet are talking to you.
Right.
It's like totally flip flop, and that's got to be a little bit of a weird pill to swallow for some. And I know, I was a little bit used to it because I grew up playing in bands and touring the country and stuff like that. So like I've been places and I'm like, oh my God, you're the guy from that band. I'm like, hey, what's up? And like I was a little bit used to it, but associating that with my military career was definitely just kind of different and weird. But got used to it. So
and even I mean, I put this question on you, even like, uh, do you feel like your YouTube community has become close friends or trusted advisors? Because for me, holy cow, I would say the vast majority, like those like ride or die subscribers, which you learn their names, and
oh
when you see
yeah.
their comments, you're just continuing the conversation, right? It's like if that ride or die subscriber who you comments regularly and says nice things or asks you questions, and you get to know them a little bit. It's like there's one guy who like lives in Ohio and knows I'm a Michigan fan and razzes me for being a Michigan fan because he's an Ohio State fan.
Right.
And when he comments, like, it just continues the conversation, and that's like such a weird thing to think about, that like the internet friends of how things work is, I rely on them for advice or comments or things like that. And this is sort of getting off topic, but the only thing I don't tolerate is like absolute hate or bigotry or things like that. It's my channel, and if you comment some bullshit like that, like, you're getting that comment deleted and you're getting blocked.
Yeah.
Like, one time, no second chances. Absolutely not. I don't screw with that. And it's not that I'm creating this like false positivity. It's that this is my domain, and if you were to walk up to me and say some hateful shit, like, that's your prerogative and I can't control that. But in this space right now, I am in eminent control. And if I say that I don't want to listen to you, like, I'm not going to.
No, I completely agree with that. Like I posted a video, we've kind of gone a little bit dark. Obviously we can't have like the fun traveling family vlogs that we used to do because, we're not really an intact family at the moment due to, geographical separation. But so I posted a little update. I was like, hey, I'm here in Turkey and stuff. And then I got some crazy comments like, you guys, I mean, it was very political. And I think it's because where I'm at, there's, it's highly regulated. I don't think I think the Turkish government is a lot different than ours. I don't really know a lot of the complexities, but it gave somebody, a soapbox to stand on and make some complaints. And it was something about, get out of our country unless you want to go home in a box and all that kind of stuff. And,
Wow.
you're dealing with some extremists. And I just went in and deleted it and then, blocked that person from ever commenting again, because that's not what I want. Like, I don't want that kind of, like you said, we do have some very loyal followers, and I don't want them to have to like in a weird way, like I almost feel like a parent, and then I don't want to
Right.
I don't want to subject the people that watch my channel to knowing like some of the darker things that my family might have to fend off, and that's fine. Like it's whatever. I don't really lose enough sleep over. I don't lose any sleep over it actually, because that is my channel's small and it only happens infrequently. So I'm not, I'm not really concerned with it, because at the end of the day, we don't make videos and I don't make a podcast to make a living by any means. I do it
Right.
because, in high school, I was a dork. I loved video club, like I would go do that.
Yep.
And, I played in bands and stuff like that. And I loved, buying the microphone and stuff like that I'm going to do a podcast with. And I like talking to people. I don't care about money. I'm not monetizing
Absolutely.
anything to like make a fortune and hopefully this becomes my career. I already have a career path. And the idea of chasing this as a career actually stresses me out, because I know that you have to hustle really hard to have any kind of security. And that's pretty few and far between. So,
Right. Yeah.
but I mean, segueing, I mean, again, we could talk for days, man. You and I have so much in common. This is crazy. Like, so my next thing is like on the consumer side of things. So, you kind of said, consider, think about that. But on the consumer side of things, like, do you think that there's any collateral damage that comes with those types of marketing campaigns, and that it being that coined to a person, that we're being like completely inundated and flooded with, hey, buy this, buy this, buy this, like almost like the movie Idiocracy? Is that,
Hmm.
do you think we're heading that direction because of like overstimulation, that it's kind of melting our brains at all?
It's a good question, valid question. I think, in what I choose to believe in my own life, and because life is a first person experience, right? So I can only interpret how I do, and I don't pretend to understand, or truly understand. I have empathy for other people, but not you know another day for another podcast. But anyway, I think that if I see messages, of course, I'm cutting through the noise and starting to subconsciously or actively block out certain messages. But I always feel in control. I would say that from any marketing message that I've ever received, to my recollection, I have never felt like I had no choice. You know,
Okay.
to turn it off or not buy that product, or feel whichever way I'm going to feel about that product. I think the most commonly turned off message I see is when, damn Sarah McLaughlin comes on from the ASPCA, and all of a sudden I'm seeing all these animals, these dogs, and I'm just like, oh, I can't, I have to turn it, or something.
Tugging at your heartstrings, right?
Right. But that's like the only real thing. I mean, I think that, um from a consumer perspective, and people get annoyed and purchase ad blockers or do those different things, I think that's the benefit of the free market that we have, right? It's like you have some level of control, and based on what you think your ability to deploy your preferences is up to you. I love ads. It's easy for me to say that because I'm in advertising, and it's easy for me to do that. But I just always get so fascinated, and what started me down the path of why I even majored that in school is, why am I seeing this right now? Right?
Mhm.
Like, why, I would be like watching cartoons as a child on Saturday morning, and it would be on a major network, and all of a sudden, like, the news commercial would come in for the news at 6, and I would be like, why am I seeing that? I'm supposed to be watching cartoons right now. That's not kid related. And that's like, even at a young age, I was understanding that. And I think that allows us to tune things out and understand what's relevant for us. But yeah, I don't think it's melting, in my opinion, our brains or anything like that. But I can acknowledge that, if you are especially like trying to learn something or doing whatever, and you're just really involved in the content, absolutely, it's annoying to be taken out of that environment or out of that content to be marketed to for anything, because you're like, I'm just trying to watch this damn video right now. You know what I
Exactly.
mean? Like, so I have absolute empathy for people, and understand that people don't want to be marketed to because it disrupts their experience. But I don't think that, in my opinion, that that's a dangerous thing.
Okay. The fact that you ended that with, or sorry, the fact that you ended that with the word dangerous, is like the perfect setup. Like I'd like everybody to know that this has not been pre-coordinated.
Yeah, right. I didn't even know the questions ahead of time. I was like, hey man, send me the questions if you want. And
no,
like,
man, I want to blindside you.
you.
I want to blindside you. And I think I tried to, before we even started this, I kind of laid the framework and just said, hey, what's off limits and stuff like that, because you really do skirt, a line. It's almost like I'm sure you have countless NDAs, like non-disclosure agreements that you do with what you do, which almost in a weird way kind of ties into like what I do with having like a security clearance, like, hey, you can't tell everybody about what we do here, because there's intent and whatnot. So, okay, man, this is where we're getting into the good stuff. Like I told you, there was a whole reason, and I think you've definitely established your credibility. And this is where I fall into my hypo paranoia side of things. Okay. So
perfect. Love it.
Now that everybody can see, like, there is a conscious effort being made for information to be given to them, correct? What the intent behind that is, for a lot of corporate America is, hey, buy our product so we can make money. And that makes total sense to me. I get that completely. But I listen to one of my favorite podcasts ever is Drinkin' Bros, which is
nice.
Is owned by the Black Rifle Coffee company guys, and it's weird. Like not to do an ad for them or anything, but they really are just like, they're people that have political values that align with mine, and I just feel like I'm listening to a conversation with my friends, because I'm like, well, yeah, that's a great point. It's it's lighthearted when it needs to be, and they hit the points that need to be hit. And so the owner of Black Rifle, he's the CEO, actually. He's one of the owners, but he's the CEO. Evan Hafer, I don't know how you say his last name. He went on a rant the other day about how Russia is employing information operations against us. And it got me really thinking. I was like, what are information operations? Like, I know a little bit about that. I know a couple people that have done that in their career. But I went home and I looked it up, and it's funny because if you'll remember, what was the terminology I gave at the beginning of this? I said that your job as a marketing, in marketing science, is aimed at understanding customers' needs so as to better market products and services to them, right? Mm-hmm, information operations is also known as influence operations. So you're like, I can't help but think that the two are very similar, right?
Yeah.
So I think you start to think, like, let me finish real quick. Sorry. You start to think about, being told something, and what are they trying to do? In the marketing side of things, they're trying to get you to purchase something or something along those lines. Whereas the potential for the same skill set that you're talking about is the ability to give somebody the idea or the belief in something, and an idea is that you believe that something might be true, but a belief, however, is that your perception that it is already true. Does that like ring any bells with you at all?
Yeah, absolutely. And it kind of comes back to an old saying, right? The difference between influence and manipulation is only intent, right?
Absolutely.
So think about a salesperson who's trying to sell you something that, they legitimately think you're going to benefit from this. They're trying to influence you to make this purchase. If someone is then trying to manipulate you into making a decision, I think there is positive, right, intent, or there's manipulation, but you are still being influenced one way or another, right? So the only difference is intent. Did they have good intentions or bad intentions? And that's a very fine line, right? A very gray area for anything outside of marketing in your day-to-day world, right?
People, and you called them bad actors, So they're people that probably have the same skills and same understanding of psychology and metrics and analytics and data just like you do, but they're using them for somebody else's greater good, which doesn't align with our own, right?
Sure. I think that, there are all sorts of assholes out there, right? That are trying to benefit or do whatever they want to do with whatever means, however means they have ability to, I mean, how many times do you just like hear about a story or, see something that you like, your brain is just like, do not compute. You're like, what? Like, why would somebody, you know what I mean? So, I mean, I definitely think that there is things out there. And I think, with the digital age that we have, we've seen, some things happen or stories circulate or speculation or things like that, which is very interesting, and it has forced a lot of these technology companies to uh, react at first and then now be proactive with what types of things that they can do to prevent a lot of those things. But just like, the difference between influence and manipulation is a fine line. What is the difference between trying to protect someone and censoring someone, right? It's really difficult. You hear about this world of fake news and all of this stuff. I can definitely empathize and understand. You would have two peoples in different camps that say this article is not true based on this fact checking, and fact checking can be construed the same way depending on what source you're using. Um, so this is actually manipulating people and trying to convince them of one way or another. But then you have the same person on the other side that says, but by removing that entirely, you're not even allowing someone to form an opinion. And what if that message is true and is removed in error because someone just believed, whether it's politically motivated or otherwise, that it's not fact, right?
Right. And
So
that's the scary thing, is the ability for somebody to just plant an idea that somebody latches on to become their belief. You know, some of the examples that Evan from Black Rifle was giving was, he's like, all this stuff that just popped up out of the middle of nowhere about Trump being a Nazi. And it's just like, he's like, and then all of a sudden, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people in the country, they jump on board and they go, oh yeah, did you hear? He's part of the Nazi party. And they believe it, because what do we do as humans? As human beings, we search out truth until we find what we want to find. Or in the very, very rare occasions we find out that, that truth has been, disproven. But more
Well, it
often
goes
than
back to
not,
this, right? Like it goes back to what I was saying about life as a first person experience. Your perception becomes your reality, right?
exactly.
So I could be the nicest guy in the whole world, but if the first time you meet me, I just had like a bad morning and like, some bad shit happened and I'm kind of like an asshole and cold to you the first time we meet, you'll walk away with that perception like, wow, River's a pretty big asshole. You know what I mean? I may not be, or something like that. But now your perception is that. And it's the same thing. You come across this information that plays on people's passions or the things that get them excited, good or bad, or angry or things like that. And I think that's what you're sort of alluding to in all of this is like, based on that data, based on that information, could it be conceivable that someone could utilize that information one way or another? And then that just kind of comes back to what we saw with the Cambridge Analytica stuff early last year, right? Like this is the kind of information that a company was piecing together. Facebook was not giving them all of the information per se that was out of the box ready for them to use. That company was manipulating that data because it saw a commercial benefit to sell, and have people's, hey, these are all the people that are going to get really pissed off about this thing. So you need to talk to these people in this way to shift that mindset. That's dangerous, and that's why I'm not defending Facebook even for the littlest bit, but that's why they had certain policies, or tech companies have since tightened up, and that's why GDPR got pushed through, is to protect people's privacy or the information that they do share, and then how making those companies liable for how that information can be used, right? It's not, it kind of is just like a microcosm of a social experiment that is human nature, right? Like
Absolutely.
you want to hear certain things, you want to, if you're a conspiracy theorist, the best thing in the world that can happen is one of your theories be validated by anything,
Anything
right?
at all. Yeah.
And you would grasp at straws for that validation, right? But then also, you're just hypersensitive to certain things. Um, a shift in the weather could be climate change, or it could be some system that is based in Alaska that's controlling the weather because we want to understand the political motivations of blah, blah, blah. No, I mean, like, you know what I mean? So it's like tomato, tomato, like how people interpret these things and feed into the narrative that they want to believe, right? And I'm not saying one way or another like what is right or exists or doesn't, but like the point is that, yeah, I mean, if preying on people's insecurities or passions is dangerous and wrong, and that's where a lot of these companies have done and continue to do a lot of diligence to prevent that, in which I it's an impossible task, right? People constantly evolve and change and find out ways to exploit systems and things like that, and it's an uphill battle that these companies face. So like I feel for them, but also, uh, you have to look at it in that way.
No, I completely agree with all that. The fact that you say, preying upon it. I mean, the downside though is like, what does a company have to lose? They just have, profit to lose or credibility to lose. But, the scary thing is like in my mind, where I'm taking this is like what it's doing to humanity. Like I had written down a question that I was going to ask you that I'm not even going to really delve into because I think we've kind of started to hit on some of those things is like, what is wrong with people these days? Why are we so overly, why are we so hypersensitive to everything? And like, oh, they said that, green shoes are ugly and I wear green shoes 6 days out of the week. So therefore, that particular organization hates me. They want me wiped off the face of the earth. And like, it's just like, they take it to these extremes. And that side of things just really disturbs me because, I had a conversation with a gentleman, in Baltimore before I headed here, and African American guy, and I don't necessarily, my look in life, my inability to grow hair at this point in my life forces me to be a Mr. Clean kind of guy, and I shave my head, and I'm big, and I'm 6'6", and I weigh 240 pounds, and I got a bald head, so I don't necessarily look like the poster child for understanding social rights and all that kind of stuff. So
but that right there is that's based in a cultural signal that's based on what one group gravitates towards, or the way to identify, in which now that could strike fear in some people just by the way you look. And I think it's conditioning to
absolutely.
some degree. That goes back to like the Trayvon Martin stuff. African American boy with a hoodie on. It's like there's nothing wrong with that. It's a kid who had a hoodie on. You know what I mean? But to some people, based on their perception, their experience, you could call it racism, you could call it whatever. It's striking fear. And so back towards your point of what's wrong with people, like why would they feel or do a certain way, I think it all can be boiled down to communication and empathy, right? Like if people now are not willing to have a conversation, but over time, because the information age is so prolific now, right? Think about it, the access to information and the different angles that people capture on video. It used to be very, very reliant. Imagine back, you'd get your news from the newspaper, like
Yeah.
you were only able to interpret the way that was written or said, and your sources were limited that would cover that information. And now there's so much, and the speed of that information is so fast that there's no filter anymore. There's no letting people think or understand or create opinions or have discussion. It's that people are moving so fast. They're just like tweeting off an opinion of, fuck this because blah, blah, blah. And you're going to have to bleep this so much.
No, you're good, dude. It's the
But,
internet. It's
like
not, there's no FCC.
you know what I mean? Like people are just rattling off an opinion before they even get to have a discussion or can understand. If someone said to your example, I think you have green shoes and thus, you should be wiped off the planet. My first question is, what is it that you don't like about green shoes?
Right, but
What,
you're
what,
you're 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 capable of, you have the maturity and the fortitude and the lack of emotional connection to that to be mature enough to take that stance. And I gave the example before about the difference between an idea and a belief. And I think a lot of times when people start hearing ideas, they get immediately defensive because they don't want those to become somebody's beliefs. And going back to that story about the guy that I talked to in Baltimore, I don't even know how we got on it. And but next thing I knew, we were sitting there for like an hour and we were talking about his fear about being confronted by a white police officer. And I was like, wow, this is like, and I was just, my brain was completely stimulated by this, because in my mind, I start thinking about, racism in America right now. I personally am not a racist, so therefore I find it hard to believe that somebody could have those types of thoughts. So whenever somebody tries to say, well, you're a big, tall, bald white guy, maybe you're a racist, or maybe they think that of me when they walk by me. When in all reality, that is the furthest thing from the truth. I judge people on their merit. If you're a piece of shit, you're a piece of shit. I don't care what color you are. If you're green, purple, or white, I'm embarrassed by a lot of white people. I think white trash is a very prevalent thing, at least where I'm from, and I don't like them very much. So
yeah, and I think it's this, right? It's, are you truly, are you open to being educated? Right.
Exactly.
And not you literally, but
right.
the
No, I know what you
listener,
mean.
anyone, right? Like, if I think true racism is fairly easy to spot. And I would say that if any true racist in America may not actually admit that they're a racist, because their beliefs or their actions or whatever are founded in some form of self-righteous belief that they are correct, right?
Correct. Yeah.
I would say that in how I've lived my life, I think all of us have, who, I at least keep in my friend circles, right, is, you may come across a time where you say or do something, and then someone educates you of, hey, that's not okay. Like that thing that you just said or did. And to me, I'm normally met with, my immediate response is mortified, right? Oh
Yeah,
my
exactly.
God. Like, I'm not some ass kissing, like, gonna tiptoe around someone because whatever. But if I truly offended someone by something that I said or did or things like that, my next reaction is I want to try to understand, and okay, how did you, why you feel that way, because why, and I did this, okay, awesome, and then I'm willing to evolve. And now, back to your point earlier around, like, well, that's me, like, that's, I have maturity or whatever. I think that is the basis, right? We have to try to educate people that just because you know or think one thing doesn't make that false. You live your truth, right? But you have to be open to understanding someone else's perception of you, right? And be open to someone else's beliefs as to understand them and have that conversation, the proverbial dinner table discussion,
Yeah.
where, you're, breaking bread with somebody. This is a safe space, and help me try to understand. I was having this conversation with someone the other day, and, I make it a belief, kind of like what I said in the beginning, I don't necessarily say, thank you for your service. Of course I do, but I try to convey a deeper message of that I will strive to never forget your sacrifice.
Yeah.
Right. And the understanding is that I may never, and likely will never, understand what it's like to be Black in America. I will never understand. So for me to say, "Ooh, I understand where you're coming from," is the most ignoramus statement you could possibly make, because I will never understand. However, I try to empathize, and I try, what can I do personally to help alleviate or talk about this situation? And a lot of things, whether that example or others in my life, is I'm not going to be a bystander. If I see something wrong, I'm just the type of person, my wife gets so mad at me sometimes, because if I see some form of injustice or somebody doing whatever, like, I'm the person that speaks up and it's like, hey,
That ain't right.
defend that stranger,
Yeah.
who otherwise feels victimized or things like that. I mean, I think there is some level of people are like very sensitive, nowadays. But also, like, if you see something wrong, something that's going on, and wrong is perception again, so there's a lot of conjecture here, but like, then you need to intervene. If you saw someone being attacked and you had a means to help, right, in any capacity, I would like to think that a rational, reasonable person would help, right? And you should. And so, helping implore people to try to have a conversation with somebody that you absolutely despise, or someone that you do not agree with ever. Like, I think that, even within my own family, we have like very different spectrum of political beliefs, or religious beliefs, or all of these things that, having that conversation as to why do you feel the way you do, why do you whatever, and not as a means of impunity, or belittling someone on their beliefs, or trying to convince them that they are wrong and to change their thoughts, but just to understand where they're coming from. I really think that that is like the basis of preserving the humanity that is in the world, right? Is just having an understanding of where people are coming from. And then you can do with what you will based on that information, and how you choose or choose not to do anything about it, right? Like, just understanding their background.
Absolutely. I mean, that's going to be what's going to open up, a two-way communication. Otherwise, it's, if you're not open-minded to understand what somebody else is telling you, you're just as wrong as anybody else. I had a situation, you gave the example about being mortified for misperceiving something. I didn't necessarily grow up in Missouri, but I definitely did some growing up there, if that makes any sense. I lived there from
Yep.
Age 18 to 25, 6 or something like that. And there's some old school simple thinking there, for sure. And
Just like anywhere, yeah.
right, just like anywhere. And there was a saying that one of my really good friends, he used to joke around. He'd say it with like a Southern accent and stuff. He'd had all these little Southern fried witticisms that he'd say. And one of them that he said, I always thought I understood what it meant. And he's like, "Oh, hey man, let's call a spade a spade." And to me, that sounds simple. Let's call simple simple. Let's call something what it is. If that's a duck, let's call it a duck. That's a football, let's call it a football. Let's not try to pretend it's something that it's not. And I've actually said that saying because that's what I interpreted that saying to be. Like, let's call it what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And then I said that about a year ago at work, and this dude that I worked with, his jaw hit the floor, and he goes, "Do you realize what you just said?" And I was like, "Yeah, let's call it like it is, And he's like, "No, dude, that's wildly racist." And I was like, "Oh my God." I felt like immediately, I was like, "Oh my gosh, I'm on trial right now. Somebody thinks I'm a racist." So I immediately went and looked it up, and turns out, that saying has roots in that. And I felt horrible about it. And I was like, "Man, thank you for correcting me." Like, I needed that, because the last thing I need is to, spout that off in a even more inopportune moment, and,
Right.
completely, disparage my character. And, I can't handle that. So thank you for correcting me. 'Cause I was, coming from that's coming from a bad spot, apparently. But, I tie all this together because I personally don't perceive as much racism in America as what the internet does. And I feel like, tying back that whole idea of, bringing back, information being feeded to people, or feeded, I can't talk, information being fed to people to plant an idea so that it becomes a belief is a scary, scary thing. And, our country came a really long way for civil rights. And I feel like we're walking backwards now. And I'm wondering, if it kind of ties to information being planted. There's that theory, like I kind of started to hit on, with Evan Haffer from Black Rifle saying, that he thinks this is information operations warfare being done. Like, hey, let's get the Americans to tear themselves apart. When in all reality, we need to be, unifying and joining together. But is something happening against us that we are unwilling to recognize or admit because we're so used to information being packed, jammed down our throats, and now we have information that has ill intent beyond, hey, come buy my shoes, Nike or Under Armour, advertising to me to get my money. That's one thing, but to get me to hate my neighbor, somebody using those same tactics, that's scary stuff, and you brought up the idea of,
and I just want to make sure we're segmenting the conversation right, because like marketing and marketers for the absolute vast, if not mostly 99.99% of them, are just trying to market their products.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
No. And they're not doing anything more devious than just that.
I guess the point I'm trying to make is I'm not trying to put your profession on trial by any means. I'm just trying to say, like, you're very well studied and experienced in the skill in tapping into the human psyche to get it to do what you want it to do. And if anything, like, I guess I'm just trying to search for some sort of validation that says that is possible, and people do need to be protective about what they consider to be their truth or the reality, as far as what they're seeing and what they're looking at. Because just because you see it on Facebook doesn't mean it's anywhere near true. Just because Absolutely. That was an idea.
Yeah, and I think any iteration of technology, right? So something exists now, and there is a whole world and jobs around it and the whole thing that didn't exist X number of years ago, right? Everybody will try to exploit everything that they can. It doesn't matter if, people were putting chip readers on credit card slots to steal people's credit card information or whatever it is, right? Like, whenever there's a new technology, people will try to exploit it, and find its vulnerabilities, and so what we're seeing now is, the weaponizing of information for some of the things that's a very, very small percentage of, the world. But sure, there's always going to be the bad actors, as you called them, or things like that. And I think the best thing we can do is educate people that this is how your information becomes compromised. This type of information can be used, not is being used necessarily in the sense of very pervasive, but can or could be used. And so you need to be careful about the information that you put out there, right? Because of that, potential. You don't buy a home security system or insurance on your car because eminently you're going to be broken into or get in a car accident. You put these safeguards in place for, if something happens, I have measures in place to protect myself, my family, replace things, in the case of a bad situation. And I think you really do need to think about it that way, and think about it very critically, because like I said, and as that evolution of technology happens, we will see the evolution of precautions and safeguards come with it, because no one wants to be made feel vulnerable, right?
Not at all.
And that's where those things will catch up as well. So it's very real. I think that like I said before, like marketing, and then how a marketing quote unquote campaign, but to just shift people's ideology, again, difference between influencing someone or manipulating someone is perceived. That's where us as consumers, yes, I am a marketer, but I'm also a consumer, right? And have a moral conscience and things like that, where I'm not gonna put myself in a situation where I'm enabling or perpetuating any cycles like that, if that makes sense.
No, I completely agree with that. I mean, that's more than anything. I think the thing that inspired me to kind of hit this topic with you was that all too often I hear people be like, "Oh, did you read this? Did you read this?" I'm like, "Yeah, I read it, but I didn't necessarily accept it to be the truth," because it's just
you
from
have to do that. Yep.
It's just from you have to approach everything cautiously anymore, because just because something, is put into 4K or 1080p and, put in your living room. I mean, technology is in such a way. I mean, I own a camera capable of recording 4K right now. I'm recording this on a piece of technology that is getting like the highest fidelity audio possible, but then it goes in the internet and gets squashed up, and it kind of ruins it a little bit. But if like nobody really thinks like, oh well, yeah, that's a bogus source, and that really bugs me, is that people aren't challenging where they're getting their information in some things. And I bring you on here because I consider you to be a total expert in the idea of, okay, we have something and we need to get it to a receptor, and how are we going to do that? And the things that go through your mind to consider, cradle to grave. You being a part of that, you do it for, positive reasons. Hey, let's get, things to people that they need, and help a company make money. And I totally am on board with that. And it's scary to think that there are people that have the skills and the knowledge and the understanding of that you do, using it for no good. And I implore people to consider where they're getting their information, and double check it. It was weird. I remember being deployed to Kuwait, and I was watching the news on Al Jazeera there, and I would see the news, and then I would call home and I'd talk to my family, and I'd be like, oh, this, that, and the other thing, we're talking about stuff. I'm like, no, that's not what we heard. Literally the same topic is being covered, but the flavor of it is being spun completely different. And that's a terrifying thing, because a lot of people, they'll take the one source that they go to find news, and that becomes their truth. Yep. So now all of a sudden humanity starts fighting against each other. Now all of a sudden there's a racism issue in America, and every cop is out there trying to gun down a black guy, and it's not the case at all. But there's a large portion of the population that believe that because of where they got their news from.
Yeah, and I like to take the approach that I don't want to say that any instance that's covered on the news is not happening, right? But the method in which it's covered, the bits that they include or not include, right? Like the most iconic way to tell a narrative, right, is to cut up pieces of what someone says. Don't play the whole thing, because they may be making an analogy or proving a point. But then if you say, let's say you, for satire purposes, you were making a joke, but then your very next sentence was, and that's the shit that these people say, and it's despicable. Well, if you just cut up and use the first bit,
right,
oh my God, this person is the biggest racist in the world, or something like that, So it's all about the morality of journalism. And, I think that one thing that I think has happened, that I think the news environment has evolved or devolved into, is that there used to be very high journalistic standards of when to publish, not to publish, validating. And you could start a YouTube channel tomorrow that, based on the conjecture or hearsay that you say, you publish, to your point, as fact. And then people receive that, and it hasn't gone through that same vetting process like it once used to, that we relied on people and trusted that the news media was doing. And so what that has done now is, now those little players are getting the coverage, because, the same reason that people watch Bravo and TLC and shit like that is, because it's all like drama, or, Temptation Island, like all this stuff, right? Because it sells, right? And so now the news media has evolved, or like I said, devolved, to maybe publishing things that are a bit more racy or a bit more headline grabby, just to compete with the eyeballs that are out there. You know what I mean? So it's not good, but I think that's the thing that we face. And I would implore anyone listening to, like Corey said, do check your facts, right? And also be cognizant of where you're checking your facts from. I think accredited, research back, unbiased firms and things like that are a good place to start. If
Multiple
you're
sources and
reading multiple, exactly, that's by far the most important piece, is a diversified view. You read one study about fast food that was sponsored in part by McDonald's, is maybe not a totally unbiased review, you know
yeah,
what I
yeah.
mean, or something like that. But I think that's the most important thing, is approach everything with a grain of salt, as the expression goes, and really really don't take it as fact at face value.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. And I'm glad to hear that, I'm not alone in my thinking. I get fired up about this just thinking about it because, I see a lot of the problems and a lot of the divides that are going on in the country. And I'm just like, I get angry about it because I'm like, I know it's selfish to think, well, I don't think like that, so nobody else can think like that. And I understand that. And I understand that, in my mind, people shouldn't fear because they shouldn't fear me. So therefore maybe they shouldn't fear everybody. And I get that there are circumstances and concerns out there, but at the same time, I think that there is just a snowball effect that's happening. And I can't help but blame it on, somebody reads it on a website or Facebook and bam, it's truth. That is now their belief. It's not an idea that they read somebody had. Like I really got wrapped around the axle on that whole idea, the difference between an idea and a belief. A belief, that is your truth. That no ifs, ands, or buts. Now it's going to take a big, it's going to take an act of Congress, so to speak, to change your belief on something. And that's a scary, scary thing. So anyway, but yeah, we'll go ahead and wrap things up. River, thank you so much for doing this. I think it's completely value added. If it seemed like a little bit of a stretch to take a guy that understands marketing and then tie into how to tap into the psyche of some of the issues that are going on, I'm sorry, but hopefully everybody learned something along the way. I know I did. It's definitely a great stimulating conversation to just see. I mean, because it really is. I mean, you're studied and you're practicing the art of influence, and you're doing that not only professionally, but like also tell everybody where they can see you guys on YouTube and everything else you're doing with social media.
Yeah, Corey, thanks so much for having me today. It was really a pleasure. I hope we get to do it again soon, not to mention just get to talk to you again.
Absolutely.
It's been a while. So yeah, I do run a YouTube channel. It's called Rivenal. I've got a little side project called The Analytics Guy on YouTube as well, which is just kind of some fun little projects where I just share some stuff in my life. But yeah, if anybody has questions or wants to continue the conversation, you can shoot me a message on any of those social media. Be happy to continue that, or if you have comments on the podcast or things like that. I'm sure Corey will let me know. So thanks a lot.
Absolutely. And we will talk to you guys, or we'll talk at you guys next time. All right. Bye.